The first deputy on the scene would later say it was too quiet for a cabin full of death. When Sheriff's Deputy Hank Clement pushed open the door of Cabin 28 in Keddie, California, on the morning of April 12, 1981, the air was still and heavy. A single bulb flickered above the kitchen sink. The cabin reeked of iron and smoke. What lay beyond that door would scar an entire town and ignite one of America's most haunting unsolved murders. The crime scene was chaos frozen in time. Furniture overturned. Blood splattered across the wooden walls. Tape dangling loosely from the arm of the chair. A half-crushed cigarette still smoldered in the ashtray, as if someone had just been there, watching. In the living room, 3 bodies lay close together. Sue Sharp, the single mother who rented the cabin, and 2 teenage boys. One her son, John Sharp, and his best friend, Dana Wingate. Their bodies bore signs of struggle so violent, it was almost incomprehensible for the quiet, working-class town of Keddie. Sue's youngest daughter, Tina, was missing. The Sharp family had moved to Keddie only a year before. A fresh start for Sue and her 5 children after a messy divorce. The mountain air and cheap rent offered peace. But peace came at a price. Keddie was forgotten town. Half its cabins vacant, its roads winding through dense, whispering pines. There were no city lights, no police patrols, and no one to hear what happened after midnight. Neighbors said the night before had been calm. Around 9 p.m., Sue and her kids were home, relaxing. John and Dana had gone into Quincy, the next town over, and returned late. Sometime after 11 p.m., the nightmare began. The next morning, around 8 a.m., the youngest Sharp boy, Greg, and his friend Justin, both just 12, awoke in the back bedroom. They had slept through everything. But when they opened the door, they stopped cold. What they saw, the bodies, the blood, sent them running to a neighbor's cabin, screaming. Deputies swarmed the scene within the hour. But by then, the damage was done, the trail already cold. Investigators noted strange details immediately. The phone line was cut. The cabin's back door was unlocked. A hammer lay near Sue's body. But it wasn't from the Sharp family's tool set. 2 knives, one bent nearly in half, lay on the floor nearby. Whoever did this had brought their own weapons and rage. Sue's body was found bound with medical tape and electrical cord. John and Dana were tied, too, though Dana's bindings were looser, as if it fought to the end. A piece of cloth covered Sue's mouth, and beneath it, blood soaked the wooden floorboards. But the most haunting detail was what they didn't find. Tina. Her bed was empty. Her shoes were gone. Her jacket missing. There were no signs of her leaving willingly. The sheriff's office launched a full-scale manhunt. Helicopters combed the forest. Bloodhounds tracked faint trails that vanished near the railroad tracks. Flyers went up across Plumas County. Yet there was no sign of the 12-year-old girl. Inside Cabin 28, investigators worked in silence, their boots echoing off the creaking floors. Nothing made sense. The brutality suggested personal anger, someone who knew the victims. But the disarray hinted at panic, maybe fear. The first suspects emerged quickly. 2 men, friends of Sue's ex-husband, had been seen around the Keddie area in the days before the murders. One of them, a former Marine named Marty Smart, lived just 2 cabins away. He was known for his temper and for spending time with Sue. His roommate, Bo Babade, was an ex-con with a violent past. When questioned, Marty said he'd been asleep at home that night. Bo said the same. But neighbors recalled seeing both men out late, driving near the Sharp cabin. Even stranger, Marty's wife later told police he had burned clothes in their wood stove the next morning. Clothes that, she said, looked like what he'd been wearing the night before. Investigators pressed him, but Marty was calm. Too calm. When asked if he knew what happened to Tina, he shrugged and said, "Maybe she's gone for good." That single sentence chilled detectives. For weeks, the investigation grew tangled. Leads fading, witnesses recanting. The sheriff's office received anonymous letters, strange phone calls, and one tip that claimed Tina had been seen alive, miles away, near a truck stop. But no proof ever surfaced. The media swarmed the small town, dubbing it the Keddie Cabin Murders. Residents grew paranoid. Families locked doors that had never been locked before. Kids whispered that Cabin 28 was cursed, that the mountain itself had turned on them. And through it all, Sue's surviving children tried to move on. But trauma clung to them like fog on the pines. Greg, the youngest, had nightmares for years, dreams where Tina called for him from the trees. Then, nearly 3 years later, a hunter trekking to Feather Falls wilderness stumbled on something tangled in brush. A skull, small and weathered by time. When investigators arrived, they found human remains, scattered bones, a child's jacket, and a pair of shoes. Dental records confirmed it. The remains belonged to Tina Sharp. The missing girl had been there all along, 40 miles from Keddie. But here's the part that still haunts investigators decades later. When they re-examined the scene, they found a fragment of tape buried in the dirt, the same kind used to bind Sue Sharp. And inside the sheriff's office evidence room, someone discovered that one piece of key evidence. A taped anonymous phone call reporting the discovery of Tina's body had mysteriously vanished from the case files. The morning after Tina Sharp's remains were confirmed, the Plumas County Sheriff's Office went silent. Reporters gathered outside, hungry for answers, but all they got were clipped statements. The investigation is ongoing. We're following new leads. Inside, however, chaos reigned. Evidence was missing. Files were incomplete. And the case that once terrified a small mountain town had suddenly become a scandal reaching far beyond Keddie. Detective David Gamberg, one of the new investigators assigned years later to re-examine the cold case, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, not just with what was found, but with what wasn't. When he opened the evidence box from 1981, several items listed on the original inventory sheet were gone. Photographs, recordings, and one particularly important tape, an anonymous phone call that had come in 3 years after the murders. The call had reported Tina's remains before they were officially identified, meaning the caller knew something the public didn't. The voice was distorted, male, and eerily calm. I was wondering if the murder up in Keddie, the one where the Sharp girl disappeared, if they ever found the rest of her. The dispatcher asked for his name. The line went dead. That tape vanished from the sheriff's office soon after. By the time Gamberg reopened the case in the early 2000s, local gossip had grown into legend. Cabin 28 had long been demolished, but the story still lingered in whispers and documentaries. Residents said the town never recovered. People moved away, fearful that whoever did it was still nearby. Gamberg wasn't convinced this was a random act of violence. The bindings, the brutality, the deliberate cutting of phone lines, it all felt personal, methodical. Someone knew the family, their routines, their vulnerabilities. He revisited the original suspects, Marty Smart and John Bo Babade. Both men had left Keddie soon after the murders, moving out of state. Babade died in 1988. Marty died in 2000. But even from the grave, their names refused to fade. Marty's wife, Marilyn, had come forward years earlier with disturbing information. She claimed her husband had been obsessed with Sue Sharp, and furious that Sue had encouraged her to leave him. She also claimed that on the night of the murders, Marty returned home with blood on his clothes. She said he burned those clothes in their stove before dawn. When detectives first questioned her in 1981, she said she didn't know anything. But later, she confessed she'd been afraid. Marty, she said, was violent and unpredictable. And then she revealed something no one expected. Her son, Justin, the boy who had slept in the cabin that night, had told her he saw what happened. He claimed he'd woken up and glimpsed 2 men, one wearing glasses, the other with long hair, standing in the living room. He said Sue argued with them, then shouting, then chaos. But the boy's testimony was murky, a blur of trauma and fear. Investigators hypnotized him, a controversial decision, hoping to extract details. Under hypnosis, Justin described seeing Tina being let out the back door by one of the men. He said he remembered the color red, maybe blood, maybe something else. The hypnosis sessions were recorded, but when Gamberg looked for them decades later, they were gone. Another missing piece. Another hole in a puzzle that someone clearly didn't want solved. Digging deeper, Gamberg connected with Mike Gamberg, no relation, a former deputy who had worked on the original case and left the department after disagreements with the sheriff. He told David that the case had been mishandled from day one. Scenes contaminated, evidence misplaced, leads ignored. Then came the bombshell. Among the few preserved items from the case was a sealed envelope containing 2 pieces of evidence logged but never tested, a length of medical tape, and a claw hammer discovered near the old railroad tracks. Both had been overlooked. Modern forensics gave them new life. DNA testing on the tape revealed partial profiles belonging to multiple people, including one male match that raised every eyebrow in the lab. It was consistent with a known associate of Marty Smart. When Gamberg compared notes, he realized that the associate had been questioned only once, briefly, and then released. He'd lived in the area for years, close enough to the Sharps to know their habits. His name was redacted in later reports, but to this day, true crime researchers believe he may still hold the missing link. As the investigation unfolded, Gamberg stumbled on a personal letter written by Marty Smart himself, found in a therapist's files. In the letter, Marty admitted something chilling. "I've paid the price for what I've done." The letter never mentioned the Sharps by name, but its timing, written shortly after the murders, left little doubt about its implication. Gamberg turned the letter over to authorities, but without living suspects, no new arrests were made. Still, for the first time in decades, it seemed the truth was within reach, until something else surfaced, a rumor that one of the original investigators had personal ties to the suspects. The theory spread fast. Someone in law enforcement may have protected Marty and Bo, either through negligence or something worse. That theory gained weight when a retired deputy admitted off the record that evidence had been moved around before being logged. Another claimed the sheriff had warned him to let the case die. By the time Gamberg pieced all this together, it was clear the Keddie murders weren't just about violence. They were about secret silence and small-town power. And then came the most haunting discovery yet. In 2016, a man metal detecting near the old Keddie resort unearthed something buried in shallow dirt, a second hammer, rusted, weathered, nearly identical to the one used in the murders, the one Marty Smart's wife had described years earlier. As for who buried it, no one knows. But when Gamberg lifted it from the earth, one thought echoed in his mind. Someone had been here after the murders. Someone who wanted the story to stay buried. And he was about to find out just how far that silence went. By the time Detective Gamberg held the rusted hammer in his gloved hands, the pine forest around the old Keddie resort felt eerily quiet, like the land itself was holding its breath. The weight of it wasn't just metal. It was history, fear, and betrayal all pressed into one forgotten relic. The hammer matched the description exactly. A heavy claw model, blue handle faded to gray, consistent with the tool Marty Smart's wife, Marilyn, had said vanished from their home right after murders. It was a piece that might finally tie decades of rumors to something concrete. But as Gamberg prepared to send it for DNA and trace testing, the phone rang, and what he heard next made his blood run cold. Someone had broken into the sheriff's storage unit, where the remaining evidence from the case was kept. Boxes were open, bags torn apart, and several files were gone. Again, the thief hadn't stolen money or guns or equipment. They took documents, specifically records relating to the Smart family and a retired investigator who had handled the original case. It was as if someone was cleaning house, decades later, to make sure the trail stayed cold forever. Gamberg knew this wasn't random. Someone was watching. He started working quietly, retracing the steps of those still alive who had been close to Marty and Bo. He found Marilyn Smart living under a new name in Oregon. When he visited her, she didn't seem surprised to see him. She invited him in, made tea, and when he asked her about Marty's letter, the one that hinted at guilt, she stared into her cup for a long time before speaking. "I tried to tell him back then," she whispered, "but nobody wanted to hear it. People around here, they protect their own." When Gamberg asked who their own meant, she looked up at him with trembling eyes. "You think it was just Marty and Bo? You think those men did all that alone?" She told him about a night weeks before the murders, a gathering in a bar near Quincy, where Marty and Bo had been drinking with a small circle of locals. According to her, the men argued over money, drugs, and something else, something involving Sue Sharp. Marty had been furious, ranting that Sue was ruining his life. A third man, unnamed, had told him to handle it. That third man, Marilyn claimed, was someone connected to the sheriff's office. Gamberg left Oregon with more questions than answers, but something about her story stuck. When he returned to California, he dug into archive employment records and discovered that one of the original investigators had, in fact, known both Marty and Bo from years earlier through the Veterans Administration and a local bar scene. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to suggest a dark possibility. The case had been sabotaged from inside the department itself. As new forensic testing came back, the results only deepened the mystery. The second hammer bore traces of degraded blood. Too old for a full DNA match, but consistent with human remains. The tape residue found years earlier carried fibers from a military-issued jacket, similar to one Bo was known to wear. It all pointed back to the same circle of men. But every time Gamberg pushed the case forward, something strange happened. Calls dropped. Files went missing from the digital archive. Once, he came home to find his mailbox pried open and his home office door ajar. Nothing stolen, just moved. A warning. And then, a final revelation landed on his desk. An unmarked envelope containing a photocopy of a page from Marty Smart's old therapy notes. It had one handwritten sentence at the bottom, underlined twice in red. It had to be done. She knew too much. The she could only mean one person, Sue Sharp. Gamberg sat back, heart pounding. It wasn't just about jealousy or rage. It was about knowledge. Sue had found out something dangerous, something worth killing for, and that something, it seemed, had ties to more than just one man. In 2018, Gamberg shared his findings with a handful of journalists. He believed the Keddie murders were part of a larger pattern of corruption, one that reached into law enforcement and the community itself. But before any story could break, one of the key witnesses, an old friend of Marty's who had recently agreed to talk, was found dead in his trailer, ruled an overdose. The timing was impossible to ignore. Gamberg pressed on anyway. He told a reporter, this case was never about monsters coming out of the woods. The monsters were already here. That same year, the new DNA evidence from the tape was officially linked to a known living person. The name was never released, but sources close to the case confirmed it matched someone still residing in Northern California, someone who had once been questioned, then cleared. Publicly, the sheriff's office claimed the case remained open. Privately, it was locked down tighter than ever. Decades had passed since the night of April 11th, 1981. The cabin was gone, the witnesses aged, and the mountain town of Keddie had long been reclaimed by nature. But for the families of Sue, John, Tina, and Dana, closure never came. And as true crime communities online reignited the investigation, locals reported strange activity near the old site. Cars parked late at night, flashlights sweeping through the trees, and once, a shadowy figure digging where cabin 28 used to stand. No one ever found out what, or who, they were searching for. The case remains open. The files remain incomplete. And somewhere in those cold Sierra Nevada hills, pieces of a secret still lie beneath the snow. The last thing Detective Gamberg ever said about the case before retiring was this: you can bury evidence, but not guilt. The ground remembers. The Keddie Cabin Murders, a story of silence, power, and fear that still haunts California to this day. And if you think this story is over, it's not. Because sometimes the people you trust to find the truth are the ones who bury it deepest. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe and don't look away.